That's what we're going to do.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you.
With that, I should be just about ready to go.
Can I start?
Go, yes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of BritCham. Thank you for joining us this evening. Firstly, I cannot hide the pride that I feel for being part of this evening's first ever live stream of any event by any chamber across our region.
Yes.
It is truly, this is the first event that will be held at BritCham CEO Series, and it's also exclusively in association with the BritCham Professional Women Group. For our guests from around the world, allow me to say that a few words of introduction about our women's group. 4 years ago, I was the rank and file committee member establishing a women's group under the BritCham umbrella. At that time, BritCham was an institution, as most of the private sector was, extremely male-dominated. Some of this is Asian culture and a reluctance to embrace change for the better, but not with BritCham. BritCham recognized that there was a huge amount of female business and community talent out there, with women who are passionate about the work that we do. And BritCham was, as it is now, open and prepared to innovate and change. In the past 4 years, we have welcomed many great female business leaders and a couple of male leaders as well. Famous is a two-way street, right? We have also been an integral part of former Prime Minister Cameron's visit to Indonesia, attracting Minister Anna Sugoi and Minister Ibu Susi to the same stage as the most talented Indonesian artists, Tian Sastro and Karina Sani. This proved to be a wonderful platform to get aligned and to promote and sample our simple tag and vision, elevating and connecting women. To preview our speakers for the upcoming months would be to take away some limelight from our very special speaker tonight. So it suffices to say, keep watching this space and keep joining our events. Ladies and gentlemen, watching this feed from outside Indonesia, you may have heard some of the remarkable stats about the Indonesian country for having multiple smartphones in action at the same time. You may also have heard how social media here has become a big influence in politics, among communities, and groups of all persuasions. You may indeed have heard about the sudden growth of app and internet-based consumerism. But believe me, stay tuned, because it is likely that the sheer scale hasn't hit your radar yet. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you all of us here present at the Ayamani Plaza in Jakarta, and those of us who are watching on YouTube around the world, in homes, cars, offices, and hotels, to a presentation and chat show by our very special guest, the Managing Director of Google Indonesia, Tony Keusgen. Please, Tony.
To make sure everyone can see all right. For those people who are receiving this over the web, please don't be driving. So put your phone down, put your seatbelt on, sit on the passenger side, sit down and relax. For all of you here tonight, firstly I want to say thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you. To stick with you tonight, it's not just a one-way interaction, we make sure that it's discussion and report. And I'm also going to brag that it's magically going to appear in my hand at the moment. For all of you, to guide our way through the next 25 minutes of conversation. So just a bit about me from an introduction perspective. I'm now in my 10th year at Google, so we have a word for us. It's called the Great Gliz. Right? We have all sorts of gliz at Google. We have We have all sorts of people who come from different communities, and they can name themselves, but the Gregors is one. There are very few people of my vintage, I think, in the business, but we've actually, believe it or not, turned 18 last year. So as a business now, Google is kind of old enough to drive a car themselves and go to the pub and so forth. So we're no longer that sort of new kid on the block. We've been around for a while now, and we're very established as a business, but things are very new to us in a consistent fashion. And new to me has been coming to Indonesia. I've been here now for 18 months, and prior to that I was Managing Director for Google in New Zealand for 4 years, and before that I started in Sydney as the Head of Technology for Google for 4 years there. And it's very, very fun to be here in Indonesia. It's a different world, and so what I thought I'd do today is actually share with you what most people want to know about, what does Google think? What does Google think about Indonesia? Why are we here? What are our ambitions here? What's so special about Indonesia from an online digital standpoint? So hopefully I can share with you some thinking around how I'm looking at the country as an online opportunity, the initiatives we've got planned for the next few years, short term, medium, and long term, and then we can talk about what are some of the big challenges we're facing, and then we'll sit down with Chris and get into some question and answer, which will hopefully give you an opportunity to converse, and we can hang around later and have more of a chat. But let's get into the Indonesian side of things. One of the things, okay, well, we'll do it that way. Yeah. So last year we held a big event called Google for Indonesia, and I announced at that event in August that we had just surpassed 100 million internet users here in Indonesia, which is phenomenal. But what's more interesting is actually between then and today, we're now at about 110 million. And what we know is that in Indonesia right now, there is approximately 1 million new users coming online every single month. Yeah, 1 million new users coming online, discovering the internet every month in this country. So when I think back about my time in New Zealand, that's the entire population every 4 months. That's the entire island every 4 months. Yeah, every 2 years that's Australia. 2.5 years that's Canada. It's incredible in terms of the speed at which this is happening. And what's exciting me is the speed of innovation that's happening and the unique factors that we're seeing in Indonesia, particularly around one. We have this saying at Google, solutions need to start with a real problem, and there are a lot of real problems here in Indonesia. Some of them fun, some of them not so fun, but many of them being solved by these mobile phone things, HP, yeah, and the utility of that is happening in this country, I believe, faster than any other country globally. And Indonesia really, from Google's standpoint, was and is the first country in the world to be really mobile only. Yeah, I mean, mobile only is here to stay. Many people are discovering the net the first time in their lives on a mobile phone, on a smartphone, and many of them may never use a desktop. I think that's quite cool, right, in terms of how they look at things. If you put a desktop in front of these people, they're trying to tap the screen. This happens, So that's really intrinsic in the behaviour. So, yeah. So in terms of just some access stats, what we're finding as well is the propensity in terms of people using the net is phenomenal, right? And it's increasing very, very quickly. So 3 out of 4 using the net daily. It's becoming just much more than just communication, much more than just a networking concept for people, right? The utility of the net is now in everybody's hands, and they're using it for much more than comms. And obviously 7 out of 10 going online on their smartphones, please. So I'm sure we can get this thing to actually work. We'll get there. What's even more interesting is if you look further out and you say, okay, by 2021, we're going to have 215 million people online. Right, now 2020, we keep saying it, it's actually not that far away. Right? We're almost at the end, believe it or not, of 2017. We've already started our 2018 planning, like a lot of people in this room. So 2020 not far away, 215 million people will make Indonesia, the 4th largest internet number of users. We judge these things by users globally, and will remain that for eternity, unless some other country has a massive population explosion. That's where Indonesia is going to sit, number 4 globally, in terms of its currency of internet users. And in terms of the size of the e-commerce market, we think that that's going to explode to about $130 billion worth of online transactions. It's not an insignificant number in terms of how this is going to drive the economy. And Indonesia, and you probably I've been in the press very, very regularly talking about our ambition to make Indonesia the largest digital economy in Southeast Asia. And it will be the largest digital economy in Southeast Asia. And for one reason, very primarily, the number of internet users that there are. But I've got some plans around how we can help shape that digital economy for Indonesia to help Indonesia as an economy itself for the long term. I think it's very important we get into that. And some of the wording behind me might give you some hints. Exporting is great. We're going to need to use the web to do that, right, to really help sustain the economy here. The government has an ambition to have 1,000 startups by 2020. We at Google are supporting that very heavily, but we think that's not an ambitious enough target. We'd like to have 10,000 startups by 2020. They're coming online every single day. And in fact, even in the time I've been here, before I came, not long before I came, I went to Israel. And I spent some time looking at, can we make Indonesia the next Israel? They call it the startup economy and so on. And the short answer is no. But the three factors that I sort of witnessed in Israel that we need to drive here. And number one was, unlimited access to, IT PhDs. Yeah, do we have that in Indonesia? No. Do they have that in Israel? Yes. They have that in India? Yes. So that's missing. Number two is the cultural component around, is it cool to be a startup, right? Is it okay to tell your parents, actually, you know what, I don't want to go and work for one of these major consulting firms. I want to set up a startup. And I think even in the time I've been here, that has changed in Indonesia, right? It's happening now. This whole entrepreneurial piece is really moving into that online ecosystem, and it's far more accepted. So that is a tick. And the other one is unlimited access to capital. And I think that's kind of a yellow moving to a green here. But in terms of the skill sets, that's something we need to address. And then lastly, it's going to create 13 million new jobs in Indonesia. So that's not an insignificant number either. So the importance of the digital ecosystem cannot be underrated. Thanks. Okay, so just in terms of what we're doing here, there's three key pillars we're focused on here in Indonesia. Number one is we've only got 110 million people online. We haven't talked about the fact that actually that's still not even half the population. And how good is the internet, right? Internet speeds, average internet speeds in Indonesia are the poorest in the whole of Southeast Asia. You get faster speeds in Myanmar and Laos, right? So this is something that needs to be addressed, right? So we've got a GDP over 4,000, growing 5.4% this year, give or take. We have a number over about 3,000, US in GDP. That extra, whatever is above that, goes into consumer spending, which is why so many companies are interested in moving into Indonesia, right? And every year that grows up, and there's more. An extra $1,000 times 257 million people. That's a lot of consumer spending that needs to happen, right? So more smartphones people are buying and so on. But the truth is, the speeds that we're putting up with in terms of online are slowing down our propensity to have a great experience online, and therefore getting the leverage out of the mobility that is the web. So we need to address that. So one of the key pillars that I'm working on is how can we actually help more Indonesians get better access to the internet. So there's a myriad of projects we're involved. We don't have any announcements just yet, but watch this space, and we hope to have some good initiatives that are quite exciting that come to light, where we're helping Indonesians make the most of the web in a way that's more accessible and more affordable for all Indonesians. That needs to happen. Also, the fact that a lot of even our stuff is quite data heavy here. So YouTube, right, takes up a lot of the world's internet capacity. We need to make this affordable and accessible for all Indonesians so we can all enjoy it. Secondly, on the developer front, so actually we hosted President Jokowi in Mountain View last year in March, and one of the pledges that we made with Jokowi at that meeting was that Google are going to train 100,000 Android developers here in Indonesia by 2020. It's not a small undertaking training 100,000 people in how to develop on a mobile operating system. So actually, I'm pleased to say we're well on our way. By the end of this year, we'll be over 20,000, and we're ramping up so quickly, we're confident that we'll be able to get to that number. So that's not an insignificant commitment to make. Remember I said to you, one of the things we're missing is this unlimited access to IT PhDs. Well, one of the things we can do is really invest in the talent and skill sets here in Indonesia to ensure that actually the mobility of the web can actually happen. It's not just skill sets that are missing. So we think that's really the biggest missing link in Indonesia, is ensuring that openness and access to talent is happening. And then lastly, economic opportunity. We'll go to the next slide. If you look at economic opportunity and the web, it's no secret here that Indonesia is made up of SMBs. Yeah, something like 97% of the workforce and 60% of GDP is driven by SMEs, and it really does underpin the whole future, right? 55 million of them. The truth is that something like 13% of them have any sort of online presence, and we know that them getting online will actually help them grow faster. There's plenty of data to show that businesses getting online will grow much faster. They'll innovate faster. They're much more likely to be hiring people, 1.5 times more likely to be hiring people. So what we want to do is use the web to speed up the pace of GDP growth in Indonesia, and the web will speed that up. And so it won't be a matter of businesses being marginalised. It will be a matter of opportunities evolving and businesses becoming much more efficient. But behind that, my personal goal is to make sure this stuff happens, right? The culture here in Indonesia is very much, you grow up with 257 million people in your front yard. You're not thinking about export business. You're thinking about, how do I make the most of this opportunity right in front of me? And I speak to so many entrepreneurs here constantly who are focused on that. I speak to so many government employees, ministers who are constantly focusing on, how do we just solve the problem? Yeah, I get that. But there are many economies surrounding this great land that actually have richer GDPs, that are able to actually sustain purchases from Indonesia, maybe at a level higher than Indonesia itself. So I'd love to see more and more startups starting to move offshore and leveraging the economies of Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, all of these areas to actually, why aren't we actually expanding offshore and exporting the fine produce from Indonesia to these lands? Yeah, and the web is the perfect way to do it, right? So let's go online and start to expand that way, please. And so we know that, this is the stat that, basically, a consulting firm came up with, but you can have a really significant impact on the pace of growth of GDP by getting SMBs online and ensuring there's more access. So those two things are evidence-based for us to really focus, please. And I've just got a bit of a video to play, if you can all see it, just to give you a sense of where we want to go with more of these businesses. This is a good story around.
Nama saya Rizky Rahmadiandi. Saya adalah owner dari Online konveksi fashion yang ada di Kota Surabaya. Awalnya memang saya bekerja, tapi pada saat saya bekerja, yang dapat uangnya adalah saya dan keluarga. Tapi pada saat saya bisnis, orang-orang lain juga, kita sama-sama dapat penghasilan dari ilmu untuk mengembangkan jualan online. Saya dapat dari Google. Saya itu tren-tren saya tinggal masukkan kata-kata apa yang dicari dengan pilihan image, maka ribuan gambar tertarik dan viral. Kebanyakan karyawan di Indonesia adalah ibu-ibu rumah tangga yang domisilinya ada di sekitar rumah saya, yang pernah bekerja di perusahaan kami yang mem-PHK karyawan. 2 tahun waktu yang saya tunggu untuk membuat tidak rutin ada di BritCham. Saya pasang iklan sebenarnya AdWords dan itu tiap hari saya kerjakan. Order datang dari luar negeri, dari Hongkong, dari Malaysia, dari Belanda. Alhamdulillah tidak pernah kekurangan orderan.
We done? All right. So, as you'll see, I mean, this really does epitomise the Indonesian thinking around actually the motivation for this individual was not just to set up a business to make money, but to set up a business to give more jobs to other people who don't have them. And I think that really is a sentiment that does underpin much of the SMB landscape here, and also a lot of the Indonesian psyche, right? Where there is that humility around helping those around. But what you'll also see from this is this opportunity that already this business is getting orders from overseas. Yeah, it's so easy to do, and it wasn't something that's just let's really focus on becoming an export business. This is a very, very simple grassroots operation that all of a sudden is expanding. And then you look at business like hitchup.com. I'm sure we all know Hitchup. What a great business. And one of the great things about Hitchup is that, and this stat I'm sure is already old, and they would, they criticise me for being out of date, but the reality is that when last I heard, their numbers were that 25% of their YouTube videos come from overseas, of watched videos, so the viewers, and so does their revenue. 25% of the revenue is coming internationally. And so these export businesses are being born every day and can really start to reach out and beyond that. And I think that's very relevant for this group around chambers of commerce and expanding into new land. And then just lastly, I just thought I'd, before we get to Q&A and a bit more of a discussion, I think we're just about right on time, is stuff we're doing around women. Now we're doing stuff globally, but what I'm really proud of with this is we're really doing it focused locally. This is a project called Women Will. And it actually kicked off 2 weeks ago with our first event. We actually had 700 to 900 women at our first kickoff event, which was really around mentoring and getting views from key women in business to talk about the actual issue. The fact that, when you look at the grassroots business, and I won't go through all these slides, but what we know is that the basic trend is this, that in really small business, women are, I think it's, don't quote me on the numbers, like 54-46 male, more female in some very small business than men, which is fantastic. I was astounded to see that those numbers were so encouraging. But then as you moved into larger and larger businesses, the percentage of women in business, in leadership roles in that, really declines quite quickly. And so part of our challenge is how do we make sure that we can really enable an opportunity for more and more women to move into those larger businesses, as well as those grassroots businesses to actually get them going. And so we really have 4 key areas that we're focusing on for this. One is the event we've already held, which is this big kickoff scenario. Secondly, we're running events in 10 cities, so we've actually leased permanent spaces in 10 cities across Indonesia. So we're not just doing Java, right? We've learned that lesson and we're past that, right? There's a lot more to Indonesia than Java, and we're in 10 cities across the country where we're running courses literally 3 or 4 days a week, and they're all already oversubscribed till Christmas, right? With SMBs who are coming to do courses free of charge with Google around how to leverage the internet to drive your business. So we're very pleased with that. And then we have a number of other new initiatives that are coming for women in Indonesia, which we can get to later. So it's very close to our hearts as well in terms of investing heavily in this. And I think what I would like to do today is also offer the invitation to your women's organisation to come to Google and hold a meeting with our organisation, and let's create some connectivity there. So that's my invitation from that. So that's kind of like the overview in terms of how we're looking at Indonesia. But I'm sure we'll discover more as Chris sits me down and goes through some questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you for the invitation. It was such a wonderful presentation and some great data and insight as to why Google is so committed to Indonesia. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to introduce Chris and ask him to please take a seat on stage. Not known for talking his heart is Jeremy Paxman or Stephen Sattler, perhaps one of the David Dimbleby Association, and certainly not new to chatting with amazing and working ministers, business leaders, renowned academicians, and celebrities. Ladies and gentlemen, it's all in his day's work, and I would please like to welcome BritCham's Executive Director, Chris Wynn.
This one's working all right? Yeah.
This one working okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Tony, wow. There was so much data and information there that some of it just blew my mind. I mean, one thing, I'm not sure whether you're familiar about exactly what the British Chamber of Commerce does, but we operate more or less in two silos. We've got our traditional membership organisation, and then we've got our overseas business network. The overseas business network, a lot of the time what we're doing is finding ourselves doing public relations for Indonesia in the UK. And I repeat the headline stats when I'm out there to British businesses, exciting them with the 250 million, with the rising middle class, the consuming classes and everything else. But to hear those internet-related stats as well, and exactly what the implications might be for business, how they can do business, how they can interact with Indonesians, and how fast Indonesians can grow themselves. I mean, that just gives me a totally different platform to work from. So thanks very much for that. I really have one burning thing to ask you, first of all. I understand that this is the first time you've actually engaged with a Chamber of Commerce here in Indonesia. Why BritCham?
I'm often criticising other businesses for making decisions based on gut feel, sentiment, emotion. Those things really we criticise, and they don't rate in our business. In our business, data beats opinion every time, and the data we have is that this is the key organisation to be aligned with and involved with in the whole of Indonesia. So that's it.
And data never lies, right? But thanks very much for that, Tony. One thing I was surprised about when I was doing a little bit of research on your organisation, of course everybody's familiar with the brand, but I was quite surprised to find that you actually have a physical domicile presence in 30-something countries around the world. And that was surprising because of the nature of your business. I mean, so much is in the cloud, and lots of clouds around Indonesia, as we know. But why the need for this, or why the choice to have this physical presence in so many countries?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In fact, I would have answered this differently 10 years ago than I do now. And so, I'm sure that our founders wouldn't mind me saying that, Google originally was built on scalability. And everything in the early days just had to scale. We've got 7 products now that are used by 1 billion people. So scale is key for us. Putting individuals in every single country in which you operate, we're not quite there yet, but I think we're well beyond that 30 number even now. That's not kind of with the original business plan, right? It's not as scalable. One of the things that we've learned, and in fact, one of the things that is my job very much in this, is that every country is different and unique, and you cannot necessarily scale everything to be a one-size-fits-all. So, for example, a big part of my role is to feedback what actually happens in this funny land called Indonesia. When I explain to my American counterparts where it is and how big the population is, and all of a sudden, wow, we should get down there. But ultimately, what's interesting is how little they know about our users. And when you look at the way Indonesians use the web, it's vastly different than people all around the rest of the world, and Google's products are used differently. Let me give you a couple of examples. One is, when you use our products in the US, which is where where most of our Eng teams used to reside, when you use the web there, it's really fast and it's really reliable. And so when you're an Eng team designing products, you design them in an environment that are really fast and really reliable. And then you go and put them out in the real world, and it's not really fast and really reliable, as I mentioned before in terms of the stats about the net here. And so a big part of what we're doing now is we have this initiative called NBU, Next Billion Users, and there's NBU countries, we are one of them. And a big part of the philosophy here is for me to bring engineers out to Indonesia and say, there you go, there's your amazing product. Now you go and use it like every other Indonesian and see how that goes. And in fact, what's happened from that is we have specific networks set up in our head office in Mountain View. You imagine how fast our head office internet is. And we actually have specific networks that deliberately drop out, right, and at deliberately low speed. And so engineers that are working on products that are going to be used in Indonesia, they have to make their product work in an environment where the net does not work or the net moves slowly. So our job is to actually, rather than try and turn Indonesia into Silicon Valley, it's actually turning Silicon Valley into Indonesia. right? And so that's starting to work. So those are the things that are sort of starting to happen to educate that. So that's primarily the reason why we go local.
Well, thanks very much, Tony. So, did you hear that? America is not the real world. Indonesia is the real world. Got it? Okay. No, that's. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and I think it's very, very true, and it mirrors what an awful lot of British businesses think of Indonesia, and when they're considering doing business here, either setting up or getting a distributor or getting an agent. It's grappling with how different doing business is here. They can be very, very successful in the UK, very successful in what has been our backyard in Europe, but trying to grapple with the challenges that go with seizing the opportunities in Indonesia is a big thing for them. Yeah. You mentioned, of course, that Indonesia uses the internet in different ways, maybe to America. Of course, I think highly topical for everyone at the moment is the way that social media has influenced behaviour, in particular, shall we say, voting patterns. For example, in the recent election in Jakarta, and mood and sentiment towards one political party or another, one group or another, one community or another. You talked a lot about the good that the internet can deliver: education, jobs, employment, startups, and so on. Do you get any sort of sense that Indonesia is struggling with the internet in terms of how it can have a negative influence on society, in communities, and in a country?
Look, I mean, I wouldn't say that Indonesia is struggling. I would say that globally, this is a global phenomenon, that, means of communication are utilised for different reasons and always have. And so whether it's organisation of, different groups or sectors in different ways, the mobility of using the web is just efficient for better causes or for less savoury causes. The reality is it's effective and efficient. I guess where I'm comforted in some ways is that I know the government is working very, very hard to address the way that the internet is utilised in Indonesia, and there are many initiatives already at hand to help drive positive utilisation, positive messaging in Indonesia across many forms. And I'm not going to use this opportunity to advertise what Google are doing around YouTube, and it's not for this forum, but the truth is there are a lot of these at hand and a lot of these happening. The reality is it's a big issue to deal with and takes a lot of heavy lifting, to look at how do you drive positive speech creators in and around video, for example, to be really driving the positive message as an option for negative message. And that same thing can happen by a guy standing on a soapbox on the corner, as it can by a guy in a theoretical soapbox online. But I will also say that I'll tell you another little story that a great. So with all of the negative side of utilising communication options, there are also many positive sides of utilising communication, which there have been. And one of the ones I came across actually in Istanbul 2 years ago was a guy by the name of Engin Onda. I'll never forget him. And he basically decided that his group, and regardless of what he's affiliated with, wasn't quite sure of the reality and fairness of certain elections that were happening. And so what he actually did was use the net in this way. He created an ecosystem where everybody pretty much communicated and was online, and he had enough of this electorate that had communicated and downloaded his app. And what's the one thing that you take with you into the ballot box? It's your HP, right? Your handphone. And so he just encouraged every single individual to take a photo of their ballot paper before they submitted it, and then uploaded it. So he remotely audited an entire election. himself, which was just astounding to hear. You know, it just makes perfect sense. It's so simple when you explain it. That every camera, every photo, phone has a camera, and so there are ways where more and more communication can actually drive and underpin more and more democracy. And so I think, I'm an eternal optimist about these things, and I think that as we drive more transparency with these scenarios, that actually the truth can ring true far more effectively. So that's my hope around where that moves.
Thanks very much, Tony. I know among our audience we've got a really diverse group representing many segments of business and indeed nationalities and cultures as well. We have the SMEs and the startups here. A number of the professional women's group are just those people. We also have some executives representing the corporate blue chips as well. Indeed, we have educators, which covers some of the different options that you say. I think what I'd really like to do, we're into two spaces more or less. It's the e-commerce space and the opportunities there, and also the social media space, and somewhere in the middle how they all complement and drive each other. I'd really like to open up this discussion to the floor. We've got a great number of people here, great diversity, and let's take some questions for the next 20 minutes or so. Who'd like to kick off for us? Should it be ladies first? What do you think, ladies?
Of course.
Of course, we're British. Of course. We're British. Gentleman in blue second. Martha, here in that, I'm more or less colourblind, but that lovely shocking pinky colour jacket there.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. So my name is Martha. I have my own small business. I'm a fashion designer, and I work with tenun ikat, which is a traditional fabric. What I'm actually trying to do is make it a little bit more tailored, more fitted for women of all sizes. And for me, one of the biggest barriers to actually really embracing a proper web store, which is something that I want to do, is fit. A lot of people are, one, unsure of their own size and whether something that you're going to sell them is going to fit. And in Indonesia, if you want to open up your market too, I have customers in the UK, in Japan, returns is tricky. I don't want to open myself up to that until I know that I've got a system where I can actually help people with sizing. Is there anything that Google is developing for small women's wear brands that actually has the technology to be able to take photos of your customer and give them a profile? I know it's developed, but is there a way that it can be used by small companies that don't have $20 million funding?
Yeah, one, congratulations on your business. I mean, that's just sounds very, very exciting, and I wish you very well. I'm reasonably au fait with the challenges you face around logistics. I speak to these e-commerce players every day in terms of returns. Just getting it there is hard enough, let alone getting it back. So the easier answer is just do what Zappos do and send them 5 pairs, and they try it all on, and then they send you the ones back. I know that that's not a realistic scenario here, right? It's totally not.
But it's totally handmade, and there's so much fabric being made in a handmade process, which actually we're all trying to promote, but it's not so practical.
Yeah. So the answer, what I'm hoping, so the short answer, do we have a solution right now for that? No. Where I'm hoping there will be some great breakthroughs in that area is around our augmented reality areas. Now you will have seen, and if you look online at some of the projects we're running, this stuff is pretty amazing. That's already happening in terms of virtualization, which is not putting on a pair of goggles. It's actually what's happening with your phone right there. So I'm hopeful that these things will be able to help with the mobility of businesses like yours to be able to allow people to do it. It's not there yet, but I definitely think these are the types of scalable solutions we need, and it would solve a whole realm of different challenges. And without Google Glass, which has now gone retro, we don't have that option. So fingers crossed, and I'll give you my details, and anything comes up we can get on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Gentleman, yes, thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I wish Google all the best with all your exciting ventures coming up in Indonesia. My question was, I work for a shopping mall development company in Indonesia. We're a US private equity invested company. A significant part of our work is building shopping malls in small cities around Indonesia. So these would be South Kalimantan and North Sumatra and Central, like tier 3 and tier 4 cities in Indonesia where there is no mall exists. So I was quite interested when you talked about 10 centers that you said you have in different parts outside of Java. I would be interested to know more about, I mean, you're always, a lot of these malls in these small cities, you're always looking at models of how you can combine e-commerce with offline retail. So like you said, it's the country with mobile first. So we're always trying to understand the mentality of customers in these small areas, and trying different models to make these small malls work. I was particularly interested when you talked about these training centers that you have in different parts of Indonesia in the smaller cities. What exactly are these training centers doing? What was the reception like? A little bit about your experience working with people there, establishing it there. How is it received? I think that would be interesting to know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. It allows me to give you a bit of an add-on on the great things we're doing. But the program's called Kapura, right? Kapura meaning entrance. I understand. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Basically, the view is we want to train many thousands of small business owners. And the idea is, one, it's free. You can sign up online, and it starts with a basic 4 facet course that people undertake, which actually gives you, the basic fundamentals of getting your business online, right? Which is, it's going to be stuff like, and it also, we've launched a product we call Presto internally, which is a free build-it-yourself website that you can have up and running now. And what I'm told is 90 seconds. I haven't done it myself in 90 seconds, but the point is we've now just launched that in Indonesia as well as part of this program. So anyone in any SMB or anyone at all can come along with those programs, go through the first 4 facets of that, which go through the basics, and then we actually step it up into another series of tailored programs where people look at it and say, so okay, I get the basics around, it might be, discoverability, having a site, geo and mobile, and then, what about e-commerce and transactable sites? What about, setting up advertising campaigns to, find users? What about using data to find users in other areas of Indonesia and so forth? And so that's how it's going. In terms of how it's been received, as I mentioned earlier, the program's already subscribed until Christmas, or the end of the year, which is incredible. So we're very pleased with that. And the pressure is on us actually. When we launched this, we had Rudy Antara who came along, constantly giving us challenges. Is like, that's not enough. And also, why are you only doing those 10 major cities? There's plenty of other cities which I'm sure are close to your heart. So what I would like to do is actually go into some very small areas and start to roll out those training programs, in much smaller remote areas. And on your point, where I'm getting the feedback from a lot of e-commerce companies is they're actually getting quite a lot of traction in those cities, right, where you don't have a mall on every corner, which you're familiar with, and those people are actually really enjoying buying online because they get to buy their Samsung TV or whatever, but there's no store around the corner selling all of these things. So I'm glad you're out there doing that as well, because I think it's going to create that right blend.
Right.
And it's going to create more efficiency for the entire e-commerce ecosystem to be able to use, if they need to, use your setup as part of their ecosystem from an operational point.
You have a pickup location in the mall or something like that.
Yeah, so hopefully that helps. And happy to give you the details later and sign you up.
A question that I received by text earlier today from one of our members who can't be here. Larger companies or smaller companies, I think they're all facing the same conundrum at the moment, and that's how to split their marketing spend. Traditional advertising, television, traditional media, and so on, and then the digital type. Have you got any, based on your own sense of the way things are moving, do you have any feel for what the right blend or balance might be for perhaps 1 or 2 particular sectors then?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good question and one close to my heart. One of the things I get very frustrated about when you think about the efficiencies that digital can bring to economies and businesses, what I would do is, if you're any business owner, I would look at your business and then look at consumers. And you know this thing called the funnel, awareness, consideration, purchase, and then retention, loyalty. Reality is, turn it upside down, right? And so if anyone is thinking about a business and marketing or advertising, the core is start where there is no guesswork. This whole famous thing about 50% of my ad spend is wasted, I don't know which half. It doesn't need to be like that. And number one is start with certainty. So, and I don't really mind how self-serving this might come across. I'm happy to challenge anyone on this. But let's say, for example, and I was just having a chat outside, we could go to anyone's business at all. Let's say you sell packet internet plans. That's your business. Right? Now, you don't necessarily need to be a telco to do that. You could be a reseller. You could be anyone. When someone comes to Google and they type in packet internet plan, what do you think they want? Right. It's not that, you don't need to do rocket science to work it out. How many people who type in packet internet plan into Google do not want a packet internet plan? Zero, right? There are no enthusiast groups, right? It's kind of like, that's it. No tire kickers, that's it. So when you think about that compared to so many other areas, so you're in a moment where there is zero wastage, 100% saturation. The only people in that moment in time, they want to buy a packet internet plan. Whereas if you look at a billboard, and there's a billboard on your way out to the airport with a packet internet plan, surprise, how many people who drive past that billboard are in the market for a packet internet plan? We know it's between 4 and 8%. So that means how much wastage is there? Between 92 and 94% is wastage, right? So I'm not saying don't go to the billboard, but what I'm saying is start with everything you do with evidence behind it, right? And then work your wastage tolerance out from there. So if you've got $100, right, saturate your first, however many there are, on everybody who's right now putting their hand up to buy a new, airline engine, or wants to hire someone from one of the recruitment companies that are here, or wants to be involved in accredited accounting business and these other businesses that are here in the room. Really think about evidence first, and it doesn't have to be Google, right? Whatever it is, the reality is the benefit of digital is it's measurable, and then work your way out to the awareness piece, right? And where the awareness piece works is, how do I use offline media? And this is what the smart, progressive business owners are doing now, is how do I use awareness to drive people into my digital channel, to get them there anyway. So when I can't fill up the funnel with people who are already in the market interested, then I'm going to go to the next highest point, and that is people who are, if I'm selling cars, people who are reading auto reviews in the paper. Okay, so therefore you might want to do, or they're reading an auto review website, then you put an ad there and you bring them down. And so forth. But when you're running out of those options, then you go to the next furthest away point and the next furthest away point, and then you start tipping things in. Yeah?
Okay, so really the billboard ads, they're the luxury of the big companies with the huge budgets and people like Martha, right, to think very much about your immediate purchasers that are looking for your particular thing. I think that was very, very well answered, very useful to everybody. Thank you. And another question? Yes.
Hi, Tony. I think it's interesting to see your presentation, especially on the moments that you mentioned that this is a time for SMB business in Indonesia to rise. And actually, I would like to hear from you, how do you see Indonesian economic landscape 5 years, 10 years from now? Because as you see SMB is rising, what will happen to the large manufacturers? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question, and part of the reason why I'm so keen on export is for that component that you just mentioned, right? So as SMBs grow and they start to compete, they're going to compete with each other, and they're going to compete with others outside, hopefully outside of Indonesia, right? The more they compete outside of Indonesia, the more they can start to drive that entire ecosystem within Indonesia to be producing for them to export, yeah? And that's the other reason why, in such a populous nation with 55 million SMBs in the marketplace, we need to find more customers. It's absolutely the truth. And as margins get tied up in every economy, how do we find new customers to make sure that happens? So that was a key component. Now there was another part of your question, and I'm just trying to come back to it right now. What will happen to the large manufacturers? Yeah, again, I think with the driving of these ecosystems that enable more customers, large manufacturers are going to be fine if that continues to expand. But if SMBs are only just competing inwardly, they will step up and start competing with the large manufacturers themselves. And of course there'll be less there, right? So more efficiency in the same amount of customers doesn't mean it's going to be a great deal for everybody. So we need to expand the income base beyond Indonesia, and that's really key.
Thank you, Tony. Another question from our audience. Yes, we're heading towards the back.
Tony, you mentioned during your speech that there's three main areas that Google is looking at: access, development, and economic opportunity. And I think it goes without saying that the development potential in Indonesia is extraordinary. We have an amazing tool and pool of very, very technical and talented individuals. And if we only took 10% of the Indonesian population in terms of the development opportunity, it's amazing. The issue is access. Is Google doing anything to assist in the access? When I say access, I mean satellite, cable, fiber, licensing to enable new cabling, new fiber, new satellite, new landing. Because that's the issue. We don't have access. It's like having a car with no gas. We don't have the access. All of these programs are criminal. We need to be able to enable it. And we can't do that because the access isn't fully available inside Indonesia. So, are we doing anything? Working with the government, creating programs?
So yeah.
Motivate both that area?
Yeah, I mean, our old CFO was famous for saying, access is oxygen.
Yeah.
And
Gas and car.
yeah, it's always right. I mean, I can't imagine, even in my home, a day without the Wi-Fi, right? It's just too horrific to imagine. So, yes, we are working very closely. I mean, we've got a myriad of access projects going on globally, which people read about every day. Google Fiber and the stuff we're doing in Africa and so on. But right here, if you look at from the start, we did begin our discussions around Loon with the government. So this is ongoing. So the balloon-powered internet is something that a project is still running. We don't have an update in terms of the progress right now. Closer to people's hearts and more kind of immediate, we're working on a number of projects with carriers around affordability, so that you can actually start to make some informed decisions around what you do and don't access in terms of content, and where and when you choose to download or access that content, and does that create a more efficient story for you? Because what we see is, there is 4G internet access in this country, right? And one of the biggest issues is actually the cost. So, we see in our data that many Indonesians on 4G access still only access the web once a month, right? And we know exactly what they do, right? They'll go and YJack, right? You know the saying YJack? Yeah, YJack is hijacking Wi-Fi. So I learned that from my colleague who was the Mexican country director, who was telling me about all of that stuff. So look, without giving too much away, we really want to make sure there's a lot more access around Wi-Fi in this country. You would have seen our announcement in India, a Google station, where we're providing free Wi-Fi at every railway station in India. It's a massive project, a massive undertaking, but it enables people to really get involved. So when you think about the incremental change between accessing the internet once a month, how do you actually step change that? And the other things we're looking at doing, coming back to your point around why we have local people here, is we're actually designing our stuff to work offline. So yes, access is key, but we've launched Google Maps offline here. Yeah, so you can use Maps offline. That's because of this issue, right? We've launched YouTube offline here in Indonesia, again because of this issue. So we're trying to tackle it on both sides. One is get our stuff to work in an internet kind of average environment. But two, how do we get involved in projects? So we don't have an update just yet in terms of infrastructure and connectivity, but we're working very heavily on it, and we hope to have something coming soon.
So Google doesn't have a lobby that's working with the government to bring prices down with the carriers. I mean, you look at an E1, which is your basic and
Could you bring the microphone closer to your...
yeah, sorry. What I'm saying is that are you lobbying the government to bring the prices down? Like the cost of an E1 in Singapore is about $150. Here it's almost $4,000. And by the time you chop that up, it's like way more. And there's access to Kampongs that people are not getting because Kampong people don't have that kind of money. And then you have to look at the infrastructure and the wireless network and the Skynet and then the archipelago. I mean, are we doing anything? Is Google doing anything to promote licensing, new licenses, new landing points? And right now, there's just a limited number of licenses and a limited number of areas, which really restricts our access.
Tony, we're hinting at government relations here, I think,
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
Influencing government's attitudes to everything that's been done with regards to development.
We are in constant discussions with the government around access. I would say, from my experience with the government, that particularly the ICT Minister, Rudiantara, is very in tune with the importance of creating more access to more of Indonesia and more available access, and certainly more affordable access. That said, I totally agree with you. There is a lot to be done to get there. So it is something that we're involved in. We're speaking with and lobbying to create this, but we're also taking things somewhat into our own hands as well, where we're trying to provide products and initiatives with the carriers that also help that for their own consumers. So we're working on both of those fronts. But you're very right, and there is a lot more to be done.
Tony, if I could bring you back to the e-commerce opportunities. As a chamber, we have been receiving unprecedented interest in Indonesia, businesses wanting to develop relationships of all different kinds, hopefully long-term relationships like many of our members have. But that begins with trading, exporting, that platform that you've mentioned. A number are put off because of the huge logistic challenges of moving product from A to B and so on, and they really do see perhaps the e-commerce route as the way to getting over that hurdle. Do you have any sort of 1, 2, 3 of perhaps business sectors or types of products or services that in fact it might be the fastest or easiest to benefit from the e-commerce platforms as they grow and develop in Indonesia?
Yeah, I mean, I would say number one is don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and be that Amazon. I think the e-commerce space in this country is still very, very interesting. But there are a number of challenges. Number one, I think the core business principle, you still need to have a core business differentiation point, right? You still need to have a reason for businesses or consumers to be interested in you and want to actually use your product or service. And probably the area that I see when I learn about what's happened in other countries that have gone through this evolution, what I'm seeing is that the kind of mass market, all things for all people type thing, that battle will run. That will run its course, and there'll be 3 or 4 or 5 players that get involved in that very heavily. But for most of your members, that's not interesting. But what is interesting is that there is still a massive amount of space for those unique properties and unique, points of interest for people. So number one that's really interesting, that people ask me, if I was going to start it, fashion is still very interesting. It's a definite point of difference, and it is an emotional connection that people need to make, right? So fashion is something as well that when you look at other developed nations, it's not like everybody just goes to one shop for fashion. It's very diverse. And so there are other areas, I think, where people can find their point of specificity and stand aside and create an ongoing communication with consumers around that. So And I think, there are examples of that in so many different areas. I know that I'm an avid buyer from a wine website back home. I don't even live there, right? It gets delivered to my parents' house. My brother lives there. I'm sure he just, takes it all. But the point is, it's a really good site, and it's very, very easy just to, literally sit while you're not talking to somebody, or you're waiting to do something or whatever, and you can literally buy within 2 clicks from me getting an email, which is quite dangerous. But those annuity businesses as well are very interesting. So number one is that point of differentiation. The two is that annuity business for e-commerce. So many businesses see e-commerce as one transaction only, then you've got to fight for the next one, and that's really not a sustainable model. And so you can look at e-commerce as an annuity model where, how do you ensure that when you have that first conversation that a second one ensues and it's guaranteed to happen? And then when someone makes that first purchase, you are absolutely sure you're going to get the second purchase. What is that second bite of the cherry that you know they're going to get? And so there are many, many ways that smart businesses are doing that, so that people are just building loyalty from their first moment of engagement. So that's where I would go.
I was smiling when you mentioned wine and having it delivered to your parents. I do the same thing, but I use my mum's credit card. Do you use yours? Okay, that similarity ends. We're coming
I
to...
use your mum's credit card.
That's where she was going. We're coming towards the end of this chat show Q&A session. I'd just like to make a couple of points for those who are watching perhaps from the UK. And I think there should be one recurring message here above all else, and it's not necessarily a message related to Google or e-commerce or social media. It's a message that Indonesia is a very, very different country to many other countries. Contrary to what you might think, it's a very, very difficult country to get to know virtually. And our message to you would definitely be, if you believe that there is a future in Southeast Asia and Indonesia for your product and service, and you certainly should, then you need to invest in a visit. You need to invest in coming here, getting to know how this country operates, what the challenges are, and you'll certainly get a real feel for the opportunities as well. Tony, and I refer to the lady at the back who talked about the cost of bandwidth being absolutely huge here. When I first arrived in Indonesia, you didn't have an issue with that. There was no bandwidth. It was really simple. You were in the car, you slept or you read. Your handphone may or may not work, cost an absolute fortune as well. Given the traffic here, we all know it's something we can't beat. What thoughts have you got, Tony, with regards to helping people, businesses getting a handle on how their employees can make more out of the time in the car, in the traffic?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. So as we were talking earlier, when I did my research before coming to Indonesia, you do the numbers and you look around and go, what's it going to be like to live there? And you certainly can't get a handle on the people before you move here, but you certainly can get a handle on the traffic. And I promised myself I was never going to be that guy, that guy who complains about the traffic. But what I think has been lacking in this country is a really solid message on what on earth to do in traffic. So I promised myself I was going to learn guitar in my car, right? So I was just going to have it there and I was just going to play. And I even looked into those silent guitars, these ones you can fold out. And they're electric, and you can just have headphones in, so my driver doesn't go completely crazy. And I've spoken to Unilever and P&G, and those big, why hasn't Indonesia actually invented the national sport around what to be doing in traffic? Because we do spend a lot of time in it. We're actually looking at some cool technologies that will enable things to happen in traffic. But even with core connectivity, why aren't there open protocols online for handphones to be able to actively communicate and connect with anyone who opens up their phone to want to play a game with you who's sitting in the traffic doing the same thing, right? I mean, I reckon that's probably $1 billion idea right there, So have that one for nothing, right? But yeah, seriously, there's an opportunity to do that. But just to get back to your point, and sorry about this, but I did remember the part about your question around the future of the economy here in Indonesia. So I find that's how slow things come back to me, right? I don't have my hand right here. But actually, when you're looking at investing in Indonesia, and there's people who are looking from other countries, if you do the maths, one of the interesting things would be to work out in how many years, each year, will Indonesia grow as Singapore each year? And I can tell you it's not very far away. That the Indonesian economy will grow a Singapore economy, right, every 2 years, very shortly. So when you think about, where in Asia to come, you can't look past those numbers, and so you need to do more due diligence. You come into Indonesia, find the right partners, and understand how things play out locally. That's for sure. But you can't argue with those numbers, and that level of growth that's going to come. It's also going to happen in terms of, think about wages, and what's going to happen if the economy in Indonesia is growing as Singapore every 2 years. What's going to happen to wages? Wages in Indonesia will far outweigh wages in Singapore. That's a fathom away from where we are now too. So, I think we're going to see a huge increase in the pace of growth of all of these things, which is super exciting.
And we certainly can't argue with that. Bypass Indonesia at your commercial peril, basically. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Tony and Chris, for the brilliant and engaging interaction. Tony, I would just like to say that your last slide truly inspired me. The one about don't just thrive, but change the world. And I would encourage each and every one of us to use Google at least once or several times a day. Let us be more mindful when we use Google to ask the question, how can I not just thrive, but change the world in some way? And let's spread positivity amongst everyone. Thank you again. Last but not least, I would like to invite Mr. Adrian Shore, who is BritCham's chairman of the Board of Management, to end this evening, give a short wrap up, and also to give a token of appreciation to Tony. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. Very inspiring presentation. I'm sure you'll all agree. I have much more to add. The numbers, the statistics, everything speaks for itself. So I don't think there's much more to add. There's only just one small question I've got worrying me, and that is at the start of this whole thing, you talked to our viewers online and said, don't use your phone in the car, and then went on to say you're playing your guitar in the car. For the clarity of viewers at home, I think he was in the back of the car, not driving at that time when he's practicing the guitar. So just in case there was a bit of confusion there. So anyway, thank you very much. We do appreciate having you at these events and having the opportunity for members of BritCham to really understand and see what's happening here, to have companies like Google in Indonesia helping, driving and innovating, because you're a company that brings the SMBs, the MNCs, everybody, education, all the sectors together, and your platforms will enable the growth that we're hoping for, and we are looking forward to developing that. So thank you for that. I'm sure everybody in the room is grateful that we do have some business that's providing access around the country where we need it. So without much more to say, I'd just like to say once more thank you, and we've got a token of appreciation for you, which we will provide now. Thank you.
So Tony, you heard us mention that we're the only Chamber of Commerce with a community program here. This is something that is produced out of Georgia, out of the disaster out of Georgia. It's become a single project. It's sticking iPhone in there. It's no Android phone. Android phone. Yes. And at here a little slogan we've got going with it, which is at work with business and at work within communities. BritCham Indonesia. It's our pleasure.
It's actually Google.
No, it should be local. I much prefer the local.
Ladies and gentlemen, big final round. Thank you to the wonderful people outside the council or away from this room that have tuned in this evening. If you found things of interest, please do contact us. We're here to help you on your journey through to Indonesia and navigate the challenges and help you achieve and attain the opportunities. Tony, thanks.
Thank you. Sure, that's great.